Louisiana televangelist, the Rev. Jimmy Swaggart, a man who once captivated millions of viewers across the globe with his fiery sermons and impassioned gospel music, has passed away at the age of 90. His death, which occurred peacefully at his Baton Rouge home on Father's Day, June 15th, after suffering a heart attack, marks the end of a remarkable era in American televangelism. As word of his passing spread, emotions rippled across congregations, religious communities, and generations of followers who had grown up watching him on their television screens each week. Hearing his soul-stirring voice echo through their homes are sitting in awe in the pews of the family worship center he built from the ground up. Swaggart was a man who was no stranger to the public eye. For better or worse, he was, during the 1980s, arguably the most recognizable and influential televangelist in the world. At the height of his ministry's success, his televised services reached over 100 countries. And his voice, both speaking and singing, came synonymous with the spiritual revival movement that swept across the southern United States and far beyond. To his supporters, he was more than just a preacher. He was a prophet, a visionary, a man who embodied the fiery passion of old-time Pentecostal revivalism. But to others, he was a deeply flawed man whose very public fall from grace left a permanent mark on the reputation of religious broadcasting. His funeral, slated for Sunday, July 13th at 6 p.m., will be held in the very church he founded, the Family Worship Center, located at 8919 World Ministry Avenue in Baton Rouge. It's a building that bears the echoes of his sermons, its musical performances, and decades of history. Before the funeral, the church will hold a public wake-in viewing on Saturday, July 12th. From 11 a.m. to 2 p.m., thousands are expected to attend, including those who remained loyal through the ups and downs, and others simply paying respect to a man who left an undeniable imprint on religious history. The services will be led by his son, Donnie Swaggart, who has taken over the ministry's day-to-day leadership in recent years. Donnie will also preach the regular Sunday morning service at 10 a.m. before the evening's funeral service. To understand Jimmy Swaggart's impact is to understand the landscape of American Christianity. During the late 20th century, Swaggart, born in 1934 in Ferriday, Louisiana, grew up in poverty during the Great Depression. He was a cousin of both rock and roll pioneer Jerry Lee Lewis and country musician Mickey Gilley. But he took a very different path than his musical relatives, though music remained central to his ministry. Swaggart taught himself to play the piano as a boy and began preaching in the Pentecostal tradition at the age of 17. His early ministry was marked by tent revivals and traveling the rural South, ministering to small communities with an organ and a Bible in hand. He preached with passion, sang gospel songs with tears running down his face, and called sinners to repentance with the urgency of someone who believed that the world might end tomorrow. By the 1970s, Swaggart had transitioned to the then emerging world of televised preaching, a format that proved ideal for his dramatic delivery and charisma. His show, Jimmy Swaggart Telecast, began airing weekly and quickly exploded in popularity. His voice, laced with Southern grit and conviction, boomed across airwaves. His sermons weren't delicate or intellectual. They were emotional, urgent, and full of vivid imagery. He preached about salvation, the blood of Christ, the dangers of sin, and the wrath of God in a way that left viewers breathless. And it worked. Swaggart didn't just build a church, he built an empire. The Family Worship Center became a headquarters for a global ministry. At its peak, Swaggart's broadcasts were carried by more than 3,000 stations and cable systems worldwide. His recordings sold millions, his publications filled Christian bookstores, and his name was known in every household that tuned in for spiritual guidance. He helped define the golden age of televangelism, alongside other household names like Pat Robertson, Jim Bakker, and Oral Roberts. But in many ways, Swaggart's reach and popularity exceeded them all. And then, in 1988, it all came crashing down. The scandal that would ultimately derail Jimmy Swaggart's meteoric rise began with revelations of his involvement with prostitutes. In a nationally televised confession, Swaggart stood behind his pulpit, eyes wet with tears, and uttered the now famous phrase, "I have sinned." The moment was seared into the consciousness of millions. It was raw, vulnerable, and, for many, heartbreaking. Here was a man who had preached fire and brimstone with such zeal, now laid low by the very sins he so frequently condemned. The aftermath was brutal. The Assemblies of God, the denomination under which Swaggart had been ordained, defrocked him. Other televangelists distanced themselves. Donations plummeted. Critics pounced. And for a time, it seemed as though Jimmy Swaggart's ministry might not survive the fall. But Swaggart, in true defiant fashion, refused to disappear. He continued preaching, launching his own independent ministry outside the Assemblies of God, and rebuilding from the ground up. The Family Worship Center remained open, and he continued broadcasting his sermons, even as his viewership drastically declined. He kept going year after year, long after the cameras and headlines moved on. In the decades that followed, Swaggart remained a polarizing figure. To some, he was a fallen preacher who never truly atoned. To others, he was a redeemed soul who had stumbled but never surrendered. And to a large base of loyal supporters, many of whom had followed him since the 1970s. He was simply Brother Swaggart, a man of God whose personal struggles made him more human, not less. His music in particular remained a comfort to many. Swaggart was an accomplished pianist and gospel singer, and his albums, many of which featured hymns like "I'll Never Be Lonely Again" and "There Is a River," continued to sell even in his later years. Done in recent times, it was Donnie Swaggart who took up the mantle, leading the weekly services and serving as the face of the ministry's modern chapter. Under Donnie's leadership, Sun Life Broadcasting Network was launched, providing a platform not only for his father's past sermons and music, but also for a new generation of worship. Jimmy Swaggart remained involved, occasionally preaching and always overseeing the ministry's direction. He remained until his death, a towering figure within his own church and in the broader evangelical community. News of his death has brought about a mix of emotions: nostalgia, sorrow, reflection. The announcement was met with statements from various religious leaders across the country. Some praised his resilience, his commitment to spreading the gospel despite setbacks. Others offered measured condolences, mindful of the controversies that once engulfed his name. But perhaps the most heartfelt reactions came from the people in the pews, those who had grown up watching him, who felt his words pierce their hearts in moments of despair, and who found solace in his unwavering belief in grace. As preparations are underway for the public wake and funeral, many are anticipating what could be one of the most significant religious gatherings in recent Baton Rouge history. The Family Worship Center, which seats thousands, is expected to be filled to capacity, with overflow areas set up and digital streams being broadcast globally via Sun Life Broadcasting Network and the ministry's online platforms. Longtime friends, supporters, musicians, and preachers are all expected to take part in remembering the life of a man who, for better or worse, defined an entire chapter of modern Christian history. What will people remember about Jimmy Swaggart? Perhaps it will be his impassioned altar calls when he would fall to his knees, tears streaming down his face, begging lost souls to come forward and accept Christ. Perhaps it will be his music, full of heartache and hope, echoing with the Southern gospel tradition that shaped him. Perhaps it will be his public failings, his dramatic confession, and the painful lesson that even those on the highest pedestals can stumble. Or perhaps it will be his persistence, that in a world quick to discard the fallen, Swaggart kept walking. At the heart of Swaggart's enduring legacy is his humanity. He was a man who, though deeply flawed, carried an unshakable belief in awe. And when unshakable belief in redemption, not just for others, but for himself. His ministry was born out of poverty, shaped by revival tents and radio waves, and nearly undone by scandal. But through it all, he continued. He kept preaching, he kept singing. And in doing so, he carved a path that others, including his son and ministry team, now continue to walk.